Season 4 of Invincible probably had the most changes of any other season. This video isn't about me trying to say the show is better than the comics. Instead, I'm just comparing these 10 major events from the show to how they happen in the comics. This is the 10 biggest changes from all of Season 4. Number 1. The Flaxan invasion was a serious threat in the show. They also have a different plan. They're coming in, taking people, and leaving. They do this a few times over the course of a few days before the Guardians show up to stop them. They also made mech suits specifically designed to fight Omni-Man. It only takes a couple of them to give Mark a good beating. But we can see that the Flaxans have really stepped up their game since they last attacked in the first season. In the comic, they weren't taken as seriously and only invaded once without taking any prisoners. Black Samson even calls them a joke after they're easily defeated. Robot is the only one who could see the threat they would eventually become. Mark was on the phone with Eve the entire time. Afterward, he even says he barely needed to be there at all. The mech suits were a lot weaker. These ones clearly weren't built specifically to go up against Omni-Man. Instead, they were easily taken out by everyone on the team. To stop their rapid aging this time, they have one machine that is emitting the protective field through the other side of the portal. So in order to stop it, Robot and Monster Girl go to the Flaxan dimension and destroy it. This is when Robot sees how many Flaxans are ready to attack, and he realizes that they must stop them now or they will lose. So he calls the rest of the team over, and Britt agrees with him despite Cecil being against it. However, a Flaxan soldier closes the portal before anyone else can get in. In the comic, they brought giant tanks over that emit the protective field. So the team destroys them, and Robot orders everyone to follow him to lead a counterattack in the Flaxan dimension. But Britt is actually against the idea of going over there without a plan, so only Robot and Monster Girl make it through the portal before it closes. The only thing that makes them seem like a real threat is Robot saying that he did the calculations and that this was their last chance to attack before they became too powerful. Number 2. Dinner with Eve's parents. The only thing these dinners have in common is Eve's dad being the least likable person. It's just a way in which he goes about it that is much worse in the comics. Starting with the show, he's hostile with Mark instantly, blaming him for what happened in Chicago just like Powerplex. But instead of losing his sister and niece, he lost his job. Then after dinner, he asks Mark to step outside for a smoke. He tells Mark that Eve has never been this hurt until she met him, where she ended up in the hospital after the Invincible War. He says that it might not be his fault, but the only 2 times she has almost died have been with him. The reason I think this works so well is that it fits what Mark is going through, blaming himself for everything that's happened as always. And by the last episode, he's crying to Eve saying he can't keep doing this to her. The comic version of this dinner just seemed a little more random and crazy, but you kind of expect that one from Eve's dad. It starts with Eve's mom trying to break the awkward silence by asking what Mark's dad does for work. She obviously forgot that it was Omni-Man, and Eve's dad starts yelling at her. During that, he kind of gives Mark a compliment, acknowledging that his fight with his father was him saving the planet. Eve asks her mother why she lets her dad treat her like that, but he butts in saying, Nobody lets me do anything, not in my own home." He stops rambling once he sees how upset he's making Eve. Then after dinner, Eve's dad asks Mark to have a smoke outside. This is where things really get weird, honestly. He goes on a long talk, first of all thanking Mark for being with Eve, even though she's no angel. And why is she no angel, you might ask? He caught her committing the evil sin of having sexual relations with Rexplode, thus losing her wings in his eyes, obviously. You see, this guy is big on being a virgin. He really rambles on for a whole while about how important it is to him that a woman be a virgin. He ends by saying he respects Mark for looking past her obvious flaws, and that it isn't such a bad thing for Mark that she knows a thing or two in bed, leaving him completely stunned and speechless. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that the show did this one better. Alright, now let's move on to the next one. Number 3. Thaedus has more depth and is much more stoic. He is overall more calm. He loses his temper a few times in the comic. For example, when he hears what happened to the coalition ship that resulted in most of his big hitters going missing in action, he actually reacts calmly, saying he believes in their strength and ability to come back to the fight. But in the comic, he gets so angry at first that he blames the captain, saying, "How could you let this happen?" But he does pull himself together and apologizes for the outburst. During the Battle of Telescria, his anger clouded his mind so much that he was distracted from the fight and instead focused on getting revenge on the mole for turning off their defenses. And he pays a price for not paying attention. General Krieg stomps on him, only for him to get back up and go straight for the mole again. He didn't learn his lesson, so Krieg slams him again. Anissa also catches him off guard before Nolan comes in to save him. He actually plans on fleeing the fight, but Mark and Oliver destroy the warship and the Viltrumites flee first. Show Theodus was messing everybody up. Krieg, Lucan, and even Anissa. We also never see Nolan questioning if Thaedus will turn against his children after the war. Number 4. The flashbacks we got in episode 2 and episode 7 gave us a deeper look at the Purge and the Scourge virus, and it also changed the timeline. Episode 7 shows us how Thrag started the Purge to rid their civilization of weakness. He didn't start it in the comic. In fact, he only rose to power after proving himself as the strongest in the Purge. Whereas in the show, he didn't even participate. He just chilled on his throne the whole time until he decided it was done. The Purge itself was much shorter compared to the comic. It lasted hundreds of years. During episode 7's flashback, we see that young Nolan was present during the start of the Purge, as well as the kids he's teaching right before the virus hit. So it appears that the Purge was over quickly, which makes more sense to me. They were wiping each other out so fast, there's no way their civilization could survive hundreds of years of that. There are, however, a lot of people I've seen saying that this is actually Nolan's father, and that the kids are just reused assets. But I can't imagine that's what happened here. Why would they reuse the same kids? We see them multiple times this episode. I choose to believe this was Nolan, especially since he actually mentions it wasn't long after the Purge that the virus hit.
But it wasn't long before the Scourge virus came and took almost all of us.
The time between the Purge and the virus is also a lot shorter in the show. Comic Nolan says that after the Purge, the Empire expanded at an astonishing rate for nearly 1,000 years before the Scourge virus hit. But since it looks like the kids didn't age much, it couldn't have been more than a few years at most. Number 5. General Telia is more than Alan's girlfriend. In the comics, she was basically just Alan's girlfriend. She wasn't even a general, so she never took over Captain Picard's ship to save Nolan and Alan from the Ragnars by blocking the sun. Instead, Nolan and Alan got lucky enough to fly off the planet. Nolan even refused to get back on the ship because his anger would cause him to destroy it. And she wasn't included in the shot of all the heroes ready to head to Viltrum. Whereas in the show, she had earned her spot, kind of. She didn't go and beat any Viltrumite ass or anything, but she played a big role leading up to the final fight. And she captained the recovery ship for finding Nolan and Mark after everyone left them. Plus, she helps Alan when he's struggling with his duties as leader of the coalition. Number 6. Debbie and Nolan reuniting. First of all, let's talk about all the changes they made with Paul. They break up off-screen / off-page in both versions, however, they remain friends in the show. He even encouraged her to go with Nolan to see Oliver on Telescria. In the comic, they ended on bad terms. Debbie's on a phone call with him, telling him to come get his stuff, and at the end she says, "Screw you, Paul." Later, she tells Nolan that being with Paul felt wrong after seeing him again. Now let's discuss the first conversation Nolan and Debbie had. Show Nolan actually planned on talking to Debbie. He even expected things to go better. That's the first thing he does after explaining everything to Mark. But he was avoiding her at first in the comic. Instead, he tagged along with Alan to get Tech Jacket. That's when he tells Alan he wouldn't know what to say to her, and that he just wants to get off the planet because of all the bad memories. After that, he changes his mind and visits Debbie. Their first talk went badly for Nolan in both versions, but it was much worse for him in the show. At first, she was quiet and let him apologize. Then she started yelling at him and telling him what he deserved to hear. It ends with her telling him to never come back. In the comic, Debbie doesn't forgive Nolan here either, but their talk was shorter and there was less yelling. All Debbie really said was that she'd never stop hating him and that she'd never believe him. He says he understands and that's it, just the one page. Their second talk after the war is over is where things really change. The conversation starts when Nolan visits the house again and demands that Debbie stop acting like she doesn't know him. She stands firm in her stance and says he can't sleep there. But this talk continues when Nolan shows up later to inform Mark that he's leaving for Telescria. That's when Debbie says she's going with him to see Oliver. She reluctantly lets him fly her up to the ship. Then the last we see of these two this season is them looking out into space from the ship. I think they will get back together, but more slowly, because in the comic, at this point, they were at least figuring things out. The conversation starts with Nolan overhearing Debbie on the phone with Paul. It's actually kind of funny to see his reaction here when he says he's not mad, simply disappointed that she took another mate. Yet Debbie raised his kid from another mate, which she calls him out on. In the show, Nolan already knew about Paul, and he was actually happy for Debbie. Anyways, the rest of the talk was pretty emotional. She says she'll never forgive him, and she wishes things could go back to how they were before everything happened. But he says things will never be like they were before, because he will never lie again. So they hug it out. Debbie's reasons for leaving with him are slightly different. Their plan is to figure things out while exploring alien worlds. Seeing Oliver is just a bonus. Number 7. I'm going to list how Cecil, Oliver, and Arts all have very different interactions with and opinions of Omni-Man compared to the comics. Starting with Cecil. In the show, he teleports to Nolan to ask about the war. Then he complains when Nolan tells him they lost all the Viltrumites. He's just berating him this entire conversation. Also, if I'm Cecil, I'm demanding that Nolan stays on Earth to protect against the remaining Viltrumites. I mean, he literally offered to do just that, but he doesn't trust him and knows he can't control him, so he tells him to get off his planet. Since Cecil wasn't introduced until after Mark and Nolan's fight, this is the first interaction we see between them in the comics. He shoots Nolan out of fear, but then apologizes. Later, he even takes him to the Pentagon, where everyone is visibly scared of him. That's when Nolan realizes he couldn't stay on Earth anymore. Next is Oliver. He surprised me in the show. He was the one person I was expecting to be all for Omni-Man returning. At first, I thought he was only mad because his dad was going to leave without visiting him, but we learn it's actually something he said during his talk with Debbie. He said he didn't love Oliver's mom. So they talked that over during their father-son camping trip while Mark is healing. He actually starts to like his father again by the time Mark wakes up. In the comic, after Nolan's talk with Debbie, he goes to talk to Oliver. At first, he says Oliver can't come, but he quickly changes his mind, wanting to spend time with him. Which is funny because in the show, it was Debbie who said he could go, and Nolan was very much against it because he didn't want to mess him up the same way he did with Mark. Oliver looks up to him and likes him right away. Their camping trip is just more bonding time, not fixing a broken bond. Next is Art, Nolan's old best friend. In the show, Nolan visits Art with a six-pack. They talk for a bit, but when Nolan asks Art to make him a new suit, he says he only makes suits for heroes. Nolan understands, and when he leaves, Art is left visibly shaken. He was friendly enough because he was scared, but he stood on business when it came to his principles. Comic Nolan doesn't visit him before he leaves for the war, but when he gets back, Art is the one who shows up to his house to hang out. However, Nolan has already left again. Also, when Mark comes to talk about what he had to do to stop the Sequids, he says he's worried about becoming more like his dad, and Art responds by saying that his father is a good man and that being like him isn't a bad thing. So it's clear he still likes him, and I bet he'd make a new suit for him if he asked. Now, let's move on to the next big change. Number 8, the Conquest rematch. First of all, one of the 3 Viltrumites that pulled up aren't the same. Crad isn't here, instead it's some other unnamed Viltrumite. I don't think Crad was even named in the comics, but he does appear during the Battle of Viltrum, where he suffers the same fate to the Infinity Ray. Conquest was squeezing Oliver's head, but it was actually Nolan that got that treatment in the comic, and Nolan looked more scared of him than he did in the show. Once Mark started choking Conquest, he said one thing, and that was it the entire time. He said, "You're never breathing again." The following silence between them added to how disturbing it was, as you listen to them struggle. In the books, they talk a lot more the entire time. For example, Conquest explains that he woke up in a sealed prison underground, but Showmark never even asked him about how he's still alive. And when he's getting choked, they still talk a little more. For example, Conquest is still cocky, saying, "You really think I can't make you let go?" The fight ends in the same brutal way, but I will say I wish they talked a little more. Number 9, the Battle of Viltrum. On the way to planet Viltrum, Mark was alone making a video for Eve where he talks about how nervous he is to fight Thrag. Thaedus made it pretty clear that the only thing that mattered was Thrag's death. And Nolan makes it clear to Mark and Oliver how overpowered Thrag is. They even talk about him over lunch. The comic is very different from this. Mark was never informed of who Thrag was, and so he tells Thrag to shut up and attacks him, but luckily he just gets swatted away. When he was on the ship, he was talking to his dad about how nervous he was for the battle, but for some reason, nobody gave him a heads up about the strongest Viltrumite. The show makes way more sense here. Then we get to the change they made with the initial attack. Every Viltrumite was hiding in the ring while Thrag floated in the open, waiting for their arrival. This allowed Mark and the others to easily be surrounded, and for some reason, Thrag decided to just watch the battle happen while barely moving. They weren't expecting the attack in the comics, they only had Thula hiding in the ring just in case. She alerts the others, and Thrag leads them all out into battle. He also instantly participates in this fight, even giving orders to his soldiers. He goes straight for Space Racer, and somehow Space Racer survives that. Thrag's first attack in the show is when he sends Nolan flying down to Viltrum. Their comic counterparts never had this talk on the surface, and Thrag never offered to forgive Nolan. Then when Thrag sends him flying back out into orbit, Nolan looks around and decides the best play is to just destroy the entire planet. In the comic, it was Thaedus who had the plan to destroy Viltrum. He decided to do this because the Viltrumites were distracted after hearing that Mark killed Conquest. We never even saw Thrag chasing after them. He must not have seen them because he was just floating up in space when it blew up instead of actually being on the surface when it exploded. Show Thaedus orders all the Viltrumites to surrender, and Thrag replies, "No, I choose death." But in the comic, they actually face off and have a little talk before Thaedus tells him to surrender. That's when Thrag says, "There's nothing left but revenge." His next target is Nolan, but he actually chose Mark first in the books, and this time he's not playing around. Mark's punches do nothing anymore. One thing I really liked about the comics at this part is Nolan telling Mark that they can't win and that he loves him. Then he tries to sacrifice himself, which leads to this chase scene where we see how scared Mark is. Then, as Nolan comes in to save him, he gets impaled. Show Nolan comes in and gets a good hit on Thrag to save Mark here. Mark asks how they're going to beat him, and he says Mark right before he gets impaled. Thrag decides to leave them both living. The only difference is that General Krieg was so angry that he decided to try and finish them off himself, only for Thrag to remind him who's in charge. His show version obeyed right away. Thrag seems stronger in the show. There are many more instances of him just not reacting to punches, and we actually see him bleed in the comics. When Oliver gets his arm ripped off, Mark goes all out on Thrag and is actually getting some good hits in. Number 10. Thrag revealing the Viltrumites are on Earth. They handled Mark's mental problems so well in the final episode. He had several different visions of his loved ones being attacked by Viltrumites, whereas in the comic, it was just a couple visions while he was on the ship. I thought they messed this up because I thought the first hallucination on the ship was going to be pretty much it. I was not expecting him to hallucinate several times the way he did. It was a great way of surprising the comic readers, although I knew he was cooked for real whenever Eve told him to go for a fly alone to clear his head. In the comic, when Mark first goes to search Earth, he comes to a conclusion that the Viltrumites aren't there. That's when Thrag revealed himself right away, and Nolan was still there. Although he doesn't really contribute to the conversation, he just says Mark a bunch of times. The conversation itself is pretty much the same, but I like the show's version better with it just being Thrag and Mark facing off. I also like how Thrag let Mark suffer for a while before he revealed himself. It also makes you wonder how Nolan and the Coalition will find out about the Viltrumites. Because in the comic, Nolan calls Alan to inform him, but Nolan doesn't know. The only way Mark can get in contact with Nolan is through Cecil's warning system. But we know Mark doesn't tell Cecil about the deal he made with Thrag, so I don't know how they're going to do this without Cecil knowing. In conclusion, I love making these comic comparison videos, so if you enjoyed, please show it some love, hit the like button, subscribe, and comment your opinions below. And as always, thanks for watching.